Well, our next panel is going to be talking about new frontiers in venture investing with family offices. We've kind of switched things up a bit before lunch to honor the wishes of our panelists. So please welcome Salale, Amy, and Chris to the stage. Round of applause, please. Thank you to each of you for joining us while we're waiting for a chair for me.
I guess you are sitting. Oh, sorry, that's my bad. I thought you were going to stand.
No worries. I'd like each of you to briefly introduce yourselves so that the audience can get better acquainted with who you are and your backgrounds. Thank you. You can go first, Chris, and the ladies are.
Well, I feel very guilty for breaking up an all-female panel potential here, but I guess I'll go first. So my name is Chris Reining. I'm from Norway. I live in Switzerland. I'm with the Porsche Pierre family office. I should probably explain a little bit what that means. So Porsche Pierre are the controlling shareholders of Volkswagen, which means we are mainly in the automotive industry with brands like Porsche, Lamborghini, Bentley, Audi, etc. So a large part of our time goes to manage those public legacy assets. And I should say the family is completely out of executive management and most of the boards of those companies. So in a way, we play an activist shareholder role with those companies. Then we have a large real estate portfolio, which is global. We have a large fixed income portfolio. We have a quite sizable classic car, art, jewelry collection, so to speak, which we also manage quite actively. And then we have the homegrown companies. We have venture capital, private equity, and we also have a foundation. So the foundation sort of works across all these asset classes on some of the topics we manage. So it's a very broad portfolio, I would say. And I've been with the family more or less for 25 years. So it's been a long stretch.
Wow, thank you for that. Salale?
Thank you.
Am I saying that right, by the way?
It's Shalale.
Shalale.
But it's not easy. I understand. I'm Shalale Zaim from Izmir, Turkey. I'm a board member for Inci Holding, which is also based in Izmir, Turkey. Inci Holding holds what we call legacy businesses in the automotive parts supplying, as well as minibars and some other businesses. Inci Holding is owned 100% by the Inci family, which I'm a third generation member of. I also run our venture capital arm, so Inci Holding strategic venture capital investment arm, Vinci. So I'm also here today as a head of investment for Vinci. And then my third hat sitting here today is as the chairwoman of Inci Family Office, which is helps Inci family and some other families in Turkey with the management of their assets. And the interesting thing about the difference between Vinci and Inci Family Office, between Vinci, Inci Holding and Inci Family Office. Inci Family Office doesn't have a strategic view. It doesn't have vertical limitations. It can invest in anything, but we will talk more about investment topics. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Amy?
This is Anya. Okay. Push the button 5 times. Hi, I'm Amy. I'm the co-founder of Anthemis and its CEO. Anthemis is an investment platform that focuses on early stage investment exclusively in financial services. We like to say that we deploy human, intellectual, and financial capital in service of reinventing the financial system. And I think the easiest and most practical way to think about that is to point to Jin's presentation. I was actually listening to him talk about his thesis, and it sounded so familiar, and I didn't catch the early part of the presentation, and the way he talks about the financialization of everything. The health of the economy relies on a healthy financial system. And the reason why I laugh is because APIS, who I have lots of time for, spun out of Anthemis. So I was looking at the thesis thinking it sounded really familiar, and then I was happy to know that actually we're backing them. So we are largely early stage investors. We have about 250 companies that we've invested in over the years, about $1 billion under management. 50% of our portfolio is in the US and North and South America, 50% in Europe and the UK. And we come in usually pre-seed, seed, Series A, but we also have a venture growth strategy.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for joining us. And I just want to say we want to make this conversation as interactive as possible, so please interrupt each other if you need to, and jump in with questions from the audience. Now, just to kick things off, in terms of new frontiers, when we think of new frontiers, we often probably think of the old frontiers as obsolete. I'd like if each of you could talk about what are the lessons that you've learned from the last wave of venture investing, and how has that impacted your organization and your strategy as a firm? And I'd like to start with Amy.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking back from 2020 and trying to categorize the spirit of the VC community, I would say it probably would have been, the best word is probably to use irresponsible. I think a lot of capital was deployed without a lot of purpose, without a lot of instinct or expertise by some pretty, non-early stage venture capitalist deployers and capital allocators. And there's two things that have to be true for a market to fall apart. Somebody has to come in with a ton of money and pump up valuations to a point that no one could possibly meet. And a company has to believe that that is what their company is worth. And when those two things happen simultaneously, you get what we've seen in the last couple of years. And for us, I think, we often call ourselves sort of slow as steady wins the race. I don't think we've changed anything. I just feel much better about the strategy that we entertained from day one, about being intentional, about the founders we're investing in, not playing a game around valuations, being conscious about the size of our funds, being conscious about how we work with our companies, our portfolio companies. Someone earlier today talked about those collaborations. They're so important. It can't be just about writing a check and disappearing. And I think a lot of venture capitalists in the last few years have done exactly that. And I think it's really important that as a community, we remember that the way we build businesses, not just make investments, is by being there from the beginning through to the end and doing it in a thoughtful, conscious, and rational way.
I'll answer from three perspectives. With the family office, 10 years ago, when we established the family office, most of the family's assets were in real estate and deposits. So within those 10 years, we convinced the family to invest into an asset class, and I think it's the asset class of the future, it's private equity and venture capital. So in the last couple of years, we've been seeing the flow from those. And as the family is seeing the flow from those and seeing the happenings in the ecosystem, they're going more and more into these asset classes, and they're using it to realize what's close to their person and their close to the heart, and that is more sustainability and ESG and impact investments. In terms of the venture capital, I will come to venture capital first. The reason why we started venture capital 5 years ago was to somehow start understanding a bit of the venture of the startup ecosystem and to get to dip our toes in the water. And in terms of when we opened the doors as a venture capital, us being centered in Turkey, not being very well known in Europe, we didn't know what we would get. And we saw over the last 5 years that we can add value to the companies that are industrial. So our first couple of investments, it sounded like a good idea, good team. We invested, but over time we saw that we made more impact on the teams that their businesses were closer to our core business. So going forward, the change there is we're going to invest in companies that we can actually add value to our knowledge. And then on the third side, which is the legacy businesses, what was interesting to us was within the 6 months of opening this fund, we saw that there were a lot of opportunities, a lot of companies. So within the holding, I call it the holding, our legacy businesses, we started looking at bigger and later stage investments for new business lines, as well as now we have a platform called InjiRadar, and this platform is facilitating relationships between the startup ecosystem, universities, and our legacy businesses. So those have been the changes.
I guess I'll add some of the pain points that we as a family office have experienced the last couple of years, and I think it's picking up on some of the topics from this morning. So we definitely deployed, probably over-deployed quite a bit in 2021, 22, and we've spent, or I've spent a lot of the last year to average down the cost, the cost price in our portfolio, across the portfolio. So taking advantage of the secondary market, and in all of those cases, more or less investing with either the GP or other GPs in the companies themselves. So I think 80-90% of our last 12-month transactions have been in secondaries to just make the average cost price more livable. And part of the lesson there is also that we are more reluctant now to lead investments from the family side. We typically co-invest for many reasons, but one is that it's when liquidity dries up, it's very beneficial to have several pockets to be able to keep the companies alive, for example. So we have a very stringent land and expand strategy now. We invest a smaller amount upfront, typically as a co-investment, and then we double, triple down in the next rounds or through warrants and options over the life cycle. So those are some key lessons, I think.
Thank you. And now moving on to New Frontiers. From speaking with all of you, it seems that there's a common thread, a core value, where you deploy capital not just for return, but also for net positive impact. Can each of you share, in terms of your thesis, how you implement that in your work, your core thesis?
Yeah, I think for us, there is. Let me sort of look at New Frontiers in both territory and sector. So, as a family, most of our legacy assets are in automotive, which also has a huge overlay with AI. We are in a very defensive mode, competing essentially against China. So we're spending a lot of time trying to position our assets or reposition our assets to be competitive with Chinese. And what it effectively means is that we think the lower mid-market for anything that is being manufactured is probably going to be a bloodbath and going to be dominated by China. So we're migrating more and more into luxury and performance assets and companies. And that could be through home growing them, so initiating them ourselves, or investing into that space, because I think whether it's Finland or it's Europe as such, Europe has an advantage, a competitive advantage, we think, on performance and luxury. So that's a defensive strategy versus China, where we're repositioning ourselves. Then there are some opportunities. In particular, we have spent a lot of time, unfortunately not yet in Helsinki, but I've spent most of my traveling days to Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, both because there is liquidity, there's vision, and where there's political will and financial capacity, typically there's traction. And it also happens to overlay with stability in the region and in the world. So that's a sort of positive thing for on a macro geopolitical side. On the sector side, we have quite a, and this is a little bit of a unique thing to a family office, I think, is that many, I'm not speaking for the whole family, of course, but many in the family have a quite dystopian view on AI, thinking that it's the beginning of the end. Who knows? We're not planning to go to Mars, but we have been looking a lot at space technology opportunities. But we have also been looking a lot into particularly the overlay from blockchain to AI. So, for example, everyone is trying to figure out how to deal with deepfakes and all of this. So we've invested a lot into technology and equity into companies that are trying to address the real imminent challenges with AI. Other than that, we're big crypto and decentralization bulls and spent probably more than most other European family offices in crypto.
Wow, that's definitely an outlier in that place. And Salale?
So for our legacy businesses, we face similar challenges as Chris mentioned. How we're addressing those challenges is we have a lead acid battery business. We can't change that overnight into a lithium ion or a sodium ion or however battery. So we need to make it as efficient as possible. We can't just close it down. So as you also mentioned, AI plays a big role, what we call digital 4.0, digitalization. Now we'll go into another next level with the enabling of generative AI. So as I said, when we established the family office, the contacts that we obtained there and our experience with LPs and VCs helped us establish our venture capital arm within the holding. And that venture capital arm helped us reach out to these firms and reach out to these new areas that we haven't been able to before for our legacy businesses and to eventually make our legacy businesses. So within the holding and the family, now our strategy is to acquire, to make investments into sectors that we think could be our future and then keep investing in those while blending the membranes of our legacy businesses because as you mentioned, collaboration will be the game of the future. I think there won't be clear lines between companies and startups and SMEs. It will be one, hopefully it will be one integrated ecosystem in which they can work. So that's how we're preparing our companies to get there, because otherwise we won't be able to exist as a box anymore. What we're looking into as the next legacy business, I don't want to say legacy businesses because I think legacy business as itself won't exist in the future, but it's easier to tell the board this way, is we're looking a lot into hydrogen, and in our conversation you asked me how. We don't know yet, but we are looking out, and with Vinci, our venture capital arm, we can look at smaller investments. We can be investors in the family office as LPs into hydrogen-focused funds, and we're also looking at AI and digital, more MES applications on the shop floor.
Let's save some of those nuggets for my next question.
Well, yeah, I mean, the only thing I like what you're saying, sort of about almost like a stealth approach, and I think for those of us who are fiduciary responsibility for return on investment, and it is our job to return and create significant returns across the board, and I'm very proud to say that we do, but we hold at our core a commitment to doing net positive in the world because it is the right thing to do, and it will generate those returns. And for us, we like to say that we're sort of kind of we created a platform to be net positive impact, but we did it in a way that was organic, right? And so we didn't try to get here, and by almost accident, we sit on over $1 billion under management, and 50% of that is in the hands, for example, of women and people of color in financial services, where anybody will tell you there's a pipeline problem. Guess what? No pipeline problem. And I think that that's really important. It's part of our core values. Our commitment to DEI was real, and it was a very much of a put your own mask on first. Our company from day one has been 55% female. Our investment team is 65% female. 30% of our team represent as people of color, and it makes a huge difference in the type of deal flow that we see. Sometimes I can't believe that I have to keep talking about this and still saying it, but in some ways it's our secret sauce. There's a handful of other financial services technology investors in this room. We don't have a lot of similar deals. And there's a reason for that, right? Because we're fishing in very different ponds. And so if you want to generate alpha as an early stage investor, you've got to be where people aren't. And that's a big part of it. The other parts of our sort of kind of origin story are around leaving the world better than we found it. And when we talk about later we'll talk a little bit about our climate tech thesis and various parts of our thesis that's core to who we are, and also the collaboration point, and that's a huge part of it. This is not a game that this is a transition over time, and there's no way we can do it alone. So we're not here to disrupt, we're here to work with others.
Speaking of working with others, you do make some good points about the collaboration opportunity, I would call it. And we have 2 LPs and a venture capital manager on the stage here. So in terms of collaboration, what does it mean to you, and how do you think of it moving forward in this kind of dynamic for new ideas, new deals? I
mean, I start for us. It's not just necessary, it is everything for us. Our core thesis, exclusively in financial services, requires us to work with other financial services leaders to make something happen. So the collaboration that we require with our ecosystem isn't just about being good partners with our LPs, but if they're investing us, they're clearly having a challenge in this industry, and we work with them to figure out what those challenges are so that we can design our thesis around how we can be smart about deploying capital to then meet those challenges 5-10 years down the road. But it's more practical than that too, right? If most of your strategic investors are banks and insurance companies, and most of your investments are in financial services arena, then you're going to have some natural business development pipelines and some natural acquisition opportunities within that community. And that's, I think, to us, it's about finding people that align with your values, and when they don't, helping them understand the purpose of having similar values.
And let's move on to something exciting. I like to make things tangible. I like talking about investments. What are some of the new interesting investment trends or ideas that you have recently participated in with respect to your thesis and what we've been talking about today? Who'd like to go? Ladies first.
I started a little bit, as I said, we're looking into hydrogen as well as we're looking into energy storage is a big area for us also because we have a battery business, although it's not, it's technological in itself, but not in the way that we understand here today. Also, I am a member of I'm a board member for the Turkish Technology Development Foundation, and Turkish Technology Development Foundation, as of the last 3 years, has now a climate focus, and now they want to do one-of-a-kind projects in Turkey, the first of its kind projects in Turkey to advance some of the technologies. And because they're an NGO, they're going very methodically about it. They looked at all the climate supporting technology and they picked subsections. They talked to players, and speaking about collaborations, they have incredible collaborations with private sector, with universities. And I know for a fact they looked at the hydrogen and they said it's too early to go in now. It's too difficult to monetize it, although they're willing to monetize it without significant monetary returns at the moment. So now they're looking at recycling cement, also because of the earthquake in Turkey. Now there's a lot of cement that has become unusable, and recycling that through carbonization process with renewable energy, for example. And I think one way we can collaborate is, although like I am in the businesses that partly still have a large carbon footprint, it's good that I can be on the board of this NGO and help make this impact, help deploy this capital that we have.
Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly address the collaboration issue, if I may, before getting on to investment ideas, because I think there's a dysfunctional aspect around being a very active manager, which we heard a couple of very good presentations, and I totally buy into being on top of your portfolio. But and I don't think this dysfunction only applies to family offices, but also potentially to GPs, is that once you, so I should maybe explain that, in the Porsche family there's a family office, but many of the companies are big enough to have their own corporate VCs like Porsche Ventures, which you probably have heard of or co-invested with. When the family or the GP comes dragging with a solution to the management that we think you should hire this CFO or this CTO, or you should incorporate this application in your solution, it does dilute, potentially, the ownership and the implementation of that particular solution or that integration of that individual. And what I mean is that it may sometimes, management or the board could say, hey, that was your choice. As the GP or as the family, you told us to hire that person or to implement that solution. And I've seen it more than one time that backfires. So I think can backfire, right? So I think from our perspective, to find that very fine balance where you are an active shareholder investor and where you are a very passive introducer is a very fine line. In terms of investment ideas, I think I touched upon it a little bit. I loved the last presentation from Jung, I think it was. We are very excited about the tokenization, the Web3 aspect and decentralization of the financial industry. So it's not necessarily that useful to have a digital asset in Finland. But if you are a single mother in a war-torn country and you don't have ID, you don't have a bank account, you need to cross a border, how are you going to carry assets or some type of financial security with you? So we think from a philosophical and a technological view, the value creation for people and humanity and individuals, and also for us as investors, is massive in the financial service industry, particularly Web3.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I completely agree with you. And when we started Anthemis and started having conversation in 2008, the conversation, we always had to convince people how big this opportunity was, because at that time, all people could understand was Fintech, taking a company and making it technological. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a complete evolution of the entire system. And I love the financialization of everything, but we talk about it as invisible finance. If we've done our job right, the financial system, Fintech doesn't exist. Everything is underlined by a financial rail.
Thank you. Very inspiring, all of those ideas. I like to finish on a positive note with a look towards the future and the next generation. So what, if you can quantify it, would be your biggest wish for a tangible impact of your efforts in your life on the next generation coming up after us?
I'll start. I think our biggest impact will be to bring our legacy companies towards electrification and therefore towards net zero carbon. And we work very hard on that, both on the legacy side and also on the venture side. On the VC side in particular, just repeating myself, I think is giving identification and banking the bankless through tokenization and crypto is where we'll make the biggest impact.
Thank you.
I think if we can end up with a system that where these lines that separate our companies from everything else are blurred into an ecosystem in the end, and we can make investments in a way that is also beneficial to the earth, like at least that doesn't take away from it, I think will be the biggest one. And because as a business family, our main goal is sustainability. And when we say sustainability, I'm not talking about only the sustainability of our families, next generations. For that to happen, our business needs to be sustainable so that it has a value. So for that to happen, the world needs to be sustainable. So I think our biggest legacy would be my biggest legacy would be to leave behind a company, or not even a company, or maybe some capital that has this vision in mind.
I agree with both. I guess those who know me would know this is probably my personal hope is that we don't rest until we see 50% of the world's capital in the hands of women. And I think that will make a huge impact on every sector of the economy. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas. Do we have a few minutes for questions? Are there any questions from the audience? We have one here on the right.
Question ready for Chris. You mentioned luxury and since you mentioned a bit on the luxury side of the automotive industry, do you think in terms of when you say in terms of sustainability, it's not only the energy and the fuel efficiency and electrification, but also the materials in the automotive industry? So, do you have a view on that, on rubber and recycling and the use of plastics and alternate materials inside this?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And when I talk about luxury, it's the whole specter of obviously the products itself, the components and the materials, but also the usability and the customer journey. But the larger point here is that I think it's, we talk about AI and Microsoft, Google, everyone, the US Silicon Valley is dominating, it seems to me, the tech side, right? And China is a real threat for us on the manufacturing side. So what does Europe have, right? It has many things, but what we see is it has a great lifestyle, it has great architecture, it has great luxury products through LVMH and Richemont and so many of our brands, right, from Lamborghini to Bentley. And that's that kind of lifestyle and implementation of a sustainable supply chain and the user experience is something China, and I would venture to say the US, will struggle to compete with. So we are gravitating to those strongholds, lifestyle, luxury, performance. You know, for example, German engineering, Italian leather, and so on. We think that's there's innovation and technology in that as well, not only AI.
I have a question for Shalale. Essentially, you mentioned that you have legacy businesses which are a high carbon footprint. Now, it might be a little bit unusual in Europe, but in most of the world, this is very, very true. And how do you sort of get a consortium going where the carbon impact of existing businesses, which cannot just be scrapped overnight, is reduced? And how do you sort of get funding into those people who are changing that aspect of existing businesses?
This is a very good question. I think legislation and targets are helping it a lot because our legacy businesses are very competitive, so they cannot sometimes afford to make a change. But now, when there's a price on carbon footprint, then it becomes all of a sudden there is a motivation, and it's more than an internal motivation. We have a high sustainability goals, and we're achieving our sustainability goals. So we haven't given up on them. We are making them as efficient as possible, but we're using the capital, and this means just both intellectual capital as well as the monetary capital. We're using that to be able to make changes there, and then we're also supporting them, their integration with the startup ecosystem for these integrative solutions. I don't know if this is I don't know if this answered your question. So it's a multi-pronged approach where you make the ones you have better, and then you use the generation of those to make a change, and then you also can attach outside, I don't want to say attach, but you can have collaborations with new technologies to make them more efficient and, again, less carbon footprint.
I think you were saying earlier, we were talking about this a little earlier, I think one of the trends to watch for is that particularly in the green space, it's not going to be about climate for climate's sake. It's about finding those managers who are investing in certain industries, manufacturing, transportation, finance, and finding their green mechanism, right? And I think if we can, that's the real alpha generation, because climate transition should be as ubiquitous as everything else. And I think we're looking at it a little bit narrowly when we look at it just as climate tech.
Thank you. We are out of time. If you have any more questions, please ask our panelists at the break. I'd like to thank you all for being here, for your contributions. On to the next panel.
Round of applause.
Thank you.
Good job.